Have you ever looked at a place name on a map, something you might drive past every day, and just thought, that it might be a tiny time capsule?
It's so true. These simple labels can hide these incredible layers of history.
Right. Ancient knowledge, resource management, even the story of a language surviving against the odds.
It's the difference between just a label and a fingerprint, really.
Yeah.
A name can be a record of historical necessity or economic function.
Exactly. And today we're using the fantastic material you, our listener, sent us to do a deep dive into one of those fingerprints, the village of Mahaut on Dominica's west coast.
A beautiful part of the island.
It is. And our mission is to unpack how this one name connects, well, everything. Botany, indigenous languages, colonial history, and even modern life.
And the key insight right off the bat is that Mahat doesn't just point to one thing. It's more like a living index of knowledge. It tells you what materials were important, where to find them, and who named them first.
And that puts Mahat into this really crucial pattern of naming conventions you see all over Dominica.
It absolutely does. It's a classic example of a settlement being named after a natural resource that was both incredibly prominent and, utterly vital to the economy. In this case, fibrous trees used for making rope.
Okay, let's unpack that botanical root then, because when you hear Mahaut or Mahaut, you'd probably assume it's one specific tree.
Right, a single species. But it's not.
Our sources show it actually refers to a whole category of trees, and they're all defined by this one single thing. Their inner bark produces strong fiber for cordage.
Exactly. It's more like a utility term than a precise scientific one. It basically means fiber tree, and whichever tree was most useful in a specific spot got the name.
And what's so interesting is the geographical breakdown. We're talking about three main species that get this name in the Caribbean.
Starting with the one that really dominates the rainforests, Sterculia caribea.
Sterculia caribea. Good.
Yeah, it's a native, very common species in Dominica. Locally, people call it Mahaut dew, or sometimes the less flattering Mahaut cochon.
Yeah.
But this tree was the workhorse. It provided the bulk material for rope making, for everyone from the indigenous peoples to the European colonists who came later.
So that's the rainforest version. But then you have another one, right? As you get closer to the coast.
You do. As you move towards the Caribbean Sea, you find the second key species, which is Hibiscus tiliaceus. This is the sea hibiscus, or seaside Mahaut.
And that's a critical distinction, isn't it?
It's a huge distinction if you're trying to survive. The sea hibiscus grows right along the coastlines. So while the sterculia gave you fiber from the deep forest, the Hibiscus tiliaceus was right there, easy to get for any maritime community.
And probably better for certain things.
Much better. Its inner bark is known for its superior quality, making it indispensable for anything that had to deal with salt water,
Yeah.
fishing nets, anchor lines, that kind of thing.
And there's a third one mentioned, the blue Mahaut, Hibiscus elatus.
Right, though you won't find it as much in Dominica. It's a huge deal elsewhere, though. It's the national tree of Jamaica.
So you see this term, Mahaut or Mahaut, just applied across different islands to different trees that all do the same basic job. It's a name defined by function, not by species.
Exactly. And that's really the so what of the botany here.
Mm-hmm.
Early settlers weren't classifying things like a scientist in a lab. They were classifying them based on what they needed to do to survive.
The utility of the resource.
The utility. The need for reliable rope in a maritime and farming economy. Naming a place after the source of that critical material, well, that's just smart resource management.
It makes perfect sense. If you need rope, you go to the place called rope tree. But if the plant defined the place, where did the word itself come from? Because here's where it gets really compelling.
We're moving from the plant to the word.
And we're tracing it all the way back to the Taino people.
The very first inhabitants of the region. Yeah.
Right. So the Taino were part of the Arawakan language family. And in their language, the word maho meant specifically rope.
Not just the tree, but the finished product.
The actual finished product.
Yeah.
So when the French colonists arrived, they were dominant in Dominica from the 1690s until about 1763. They needed a word for this stuff.
And it was just far more practical to adopt the local indigenous term for rope than to, invent a new one.
But they didn't just keep the spelling Mahaut, they adapted it. Why change it to Mahaut? Why not just call the village Mahaut?
And that's that fascinating colonial linguistic layer coming in. The French adjusted the spelling to Mahaut to make it conform to French phonetic rules, or what's called orthography. They were making the word look and sound French.
Can you explain that a little more, the phonetics of it?
Sure. In French, you often see an unpronounced consonant at the end of a word. By adding that silent tent, they were basically anchoring the pronunciation into a common French pattern.
So they took the Taino knowledge about the plant, but then they sort of stamped their own linguistic structure onto the word.
A perfect summary.
Yeah.
It's a living record of that cultural interaction. The Taino provided the concept, the French provided the spelling.
Now that we understand the word and the trees, let's focus on the actual uses, because that explains why it was so essential, essential enough to name an entire village after.
This wasn't just some minor craft. It was the backbone of survival. Everything relied on rope. Agriculture, construction, fishing, and the process of making it was an art.
The sources walk us through it, and it's pretty intensive. First, the harvesting. You had to be strategic about it, right? Stripping bark from young shoots, not the whole tree.
Then came the really hard part, the processing. The bark wasn't used dry, it had to be retted.
Retted.
It means they'd soak the bark in water for weeks, sometimes months, until the layers separated and the tough parts broke down. It's what turns raw bark into flexible fibers.
And after all that work, you get to the crafting, plaiting or weaving these long, strong strands into ropes and fishing lines.
And we have to emphasize the Kalinago peoples here, the indigenous inhabitants. Their whole maritime culture depended on this stuff.
For what specifically?
Complex fishing nets, for lashing harpoons to hunt turtles and dugongs, and critically, for binding together the planks on their amazing canoes. The strength and availability of this bark was central to everything they did.
And this level of importance is exactly why place name experts, like Douglas Taylor back in the 1950s, came to the conclusion he did about Mahaut.
Taylor established that the name is definitively descriptive. It's about the resource, the function. It's not commemorative. It's not honoring a person or an event. It tells you what happened there, not who owned it.
And that leads to this bigger distinction you can use to analyze almost any map of the Caribbean. Mahaut's naming fits a dominant pattern in Dominica, but it's a very different pattern from another common one.
Right. Dominica's colonial place names fall into two basic categories, and they tell two very different stories.
On one hand, you have names commemorating the European estate owners. Places like Laudat or Pichilin, those names tell a story of, well, ownership and control.
Exactly. But then you have the second category. Names describing natural features or vital resources. Mahaut is squarely in that group, along with Soufriere for sulfur or Grand Fond of Big Valley.
So half the map tells you who ruled the land, and the other half tells you what the land provided.
That's a great way to put it.
And the comparison to Roseau, the capital, is just perfect.
It is. Roseau also gets its name from a useful plant Generium sagittatum, a type of reed that grew along the river. It was used for thatch, for light construction.
So both Mahaut and Rousseau show this really pragmatic logic. Name a place after the most useful thing you find there, and often use the local word for it.
And that practical focus is why the names have stuck around for so long.
And the sheer persistence of Mahaut is, it's really significant when you think about the bigger picture of Caribbean history.
I mean, Dominica had such a complex linguistic history. You had Arawakan speakers, then the Kalinago, then French colonization, and then the British took over after 1763.
And yet, even with English as the official language, the name Mahaut endured, just like so many other French and indigenous place names.
It shows that deep-rooted utility can be more powerful than a colonial decree. The local functional name was just too ingrained in the landscape and in people's memory to be easily replaced. It's a small victory for pragmatic survival.
So we've covered its botanical, linguistic, and historical past. But what about the Mahaut of today? Does that history of utility still matter?
Oh, absolutely it matters, even if the specific resource has changed. Today, Mahaut is a large community in St. Paul Parish, home to over 2,000 people.
And the old rope-making industry is mostly gone, I assume?
It's largely faded, yes. But the village is still known for its strong fishing community. So you see this clear continuity. The historical value of the location was tied to the sea, and today it's still defined by harvesting from the sea.
And our sources point to this really interesting shift in resources more recently. For decades, Mahaut was home to a huge industrial operation, the Dominica Colgate-Palmolive Coconut Products Factory.
And this is where the story gets modern and a bit more complex. That shift from harvesting local fiber for rope to processing coconuts for a global company, well, that reflects Dominica's integration into the world economy.
A modern evolution of its resource identity.
Exactly. But that factory story also shows a real vulnerability. It was the heart of the community's economy for decades, until it closed in 2015.
And that closure was after Tropical Storm Erica, right?
Yes. The storm's devastation was the final blow. And it's a powerful modern counterpoint to the resilience of the old name. The name Mahaut reflects a natural fiber that could be remade after every storm. But the factory shows how vulnerable these centralized modern economies can be to nature.
A constant struggle between human enterprise and the climate.
It is, and yet the village itself endures. Its spirit is so vibrant. It's the birthplace of the incredible Olympic gold medalist, Thea Lafond.
An amazing athlete.
So Mahat is this village with roots in ancient fiber, but its present is planted firmly in modern achievement and community resilience.
When you sum it all up, the journey of this name is, well, it's a complete linguistic tapestry.
It really is. It starts as a Taino word for rope, gets adapted by the French as Mahaut, and it continues today to define a community that, in one way or another, is still focused on the essential resources for life on an island. The name preserves that memory better than any monument could.
So this deep dive has shown us that Mahaut isn't just a label on a map. It really is a historical, botanical, and linguistic guide to Dominica. You now understand how one simple place name can be the intersection of three different trees and two different languages, all centered around the simple, fundamental need to make rope.
And this incredible persistence raises an important question for you to think about. Considering how many place names in the Caribbean were shaped by colonial estate owners, names that only tell us who was in charge, what other vital resources, what forgotten practical knowledge might be hidden inside the region's simpler, descriptive place names? You might start seeing simple village names not just as history, but as instruction manuals left behind, teaching us exactly what earlier generations valued most for their survival: